on for what is required to achieve true data portability. So data portability is the concept that if there's no friction to the exchange, ethical and permission exchange of personal data across the economy, then we go a lot further as an economy. So a lot of the impetus for this talk, for where we're at with the Hub of All Things right now, and the reasoning for why the Hub of All Things exists is very well aligned with this sort of movement on a much larger level towards sort of achieving this sort of rough goal. I won't talk any more about data mobility or data portability. I'll leave that to sort of the economic arguments and some of the other things that are going to be talked about by some of the speakers. But what we want to try and convey is that inside that report, and also just broadly inside the concept of trying to get to data portability, is are identified 5 core challenges. One of the core challenges, the first core challenge that they talk about in there, is that we lack a common infrastructure and standard for how to actually technologically transport data in a way that is conversal, easily permissioned, fluid, straightforward, and that can be sort of serving to try and provide the infrastructure underpinnings to achieving a lot of the upside potential for data portability. That is what we try and be. So when you think about Hub of All Things on a conceptual level, we have to talk about why and what value to what players achieving data portability gets to, but when you get down to a technical level, it's actually quite a lot more straightforward. It's essentially trying to outsource the infrastructure layer of the user account. The way you construct user accounts at the moment is you build them into a vertical stack with the application, and you then interact with the user of the application on that vertical stack. If you were able to separate that out and provide it as an infrastructure layer for all applications, then you could achieve quite a lot of efficiency and convenience. And our technology is a way of essentially doing that across an entire economy's worth of apps and services that we come to. So in this diagram, which I won't go into in too much depth, we try and identify a personal data account, that's what PDA stands for, personal data account, as being a piece in the technology stack that is owned by the user. And then the user goes with that personal data account to the various apps and services and companies that they liaise with across the economy. When they do that, the hosting implications and costs and challenges to the app or service are greatly reduced, and the user gains a lot of the upside of having data mobility. This is all we're trying to get to. We want to make it as easy as possible for multiple apps to conduct the same data relationships with the same user by treating it essentially like a hosted service, the same as VM's own web services or Firebase or anything else for your technological host. Now, before I go too much further, I will quickly try and draw the parallel. Scary. Between treating data transactions and data payments like they are currency payments. If we have the same level of infrastructure for data transaction that we do for standard payments infrastructure, we could achieve a lot of the kinds of things that we're looking for across the economy. That is our goal. We believe that this piece of technology does that, and it's worth just sort of very quickly highlighting before we get into the grit of it, what it is supposed to be, and then I'll walk through exactly how it is. We want the Hub of All Things microserver, which is what it's called, to be a personal data account technology that gives app builder APIs access to decentralized personal data accounts, that gives the ability for legal and transparent personal data transactions, even on the micro level, that gives private and shareable user-owned data. User-owned is a hard term there, something difficult to, I would say, defend, but I don't think it's difficult to defend. I think it's actually much harder to just wrap your head around what owning data like that actually would mean. It gives you access to, if you're an app builder, it gives you access to secure and verifiable dynamic data in a way that is much harder to achieve if you're building the infrastructure stack yourself. It lays the groundwork for edge analytics and for running analytics and machine learning algorithms over a much more intimate data set. And it gives the ability to do data access and handling over much more sensitive types of information. But mostly what it does is it unlocks the key to potentially much more trustworthy, or a much wider availability of trustworthy and ethically sourced data. So there are some places that you can go. Well, by all means, go ahead.
So the question is, what makes it ethical?
Clearer and better permission.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, that and like 10 million other thorny things that we can talk about for like hours, which I'll also leave to some of the other speakers.
Another clarificatory question. Is it only API apps that have a specific agreement with you that could get access to this?
Open APIs.
Yeah.
The idea is that if you want to use our services to access the information, so I will get into this in the description in a second, but the hat itself, the core technology is open source. And you can build any number of services and whatever on top of that open sources that you like. We build services on top of them. If you want to use our services, you pay us. Otherwise, you just choose them.
I have a question too.
Really?
I'm sorry, but I do have a habit of making parallels to understand the value addition. So I just want to put an example so that I can contrast it. Would you like to contrast it with a two-factor authentication for, let's say, login via Google? Google has a lot of personal data for me, and if I've set a two-factor authentication, it kind of simulates the scenario. So where exactly are we saying is the
very good? So social login is the furthest we've come in the vertical tech stack
exactly.
to this kind of decentralization.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, if you want to get into the sort of the more economic side of the conversation, the argument is that either the economy will trend towards one of the major dominant tech players owning most of the identity because they have won the social login war, or you go in the complete other direction and social login dies because we refuse to accept it across the economy, or we try and adopt the upsides of social login or other things that provide a richer user profile, while solving some of the downsides of having people own all your data. And we do that with a more decentralized approach. I wanted to highlight these because if this is going to be a more technical talk, I'm very keenly aware that a lot of the quite technical people in the room may not actually want to listen to me talk or engage with me. They may just want to go and do some further reading themselves and pull this down to their level as much as they can. I'm very bad technically. I'm working on it very hard. But if you want to go as deep as you'd like into this, these are the places to go. I will pull up a couple of them right up front, and I'll make these slides available so you can both see these. What I would say is we have a slide share, and I'm going to switch to a different deck now. But we have a slide share of the deck that I'm about to show you, and if you would like to use it or want to take a look, that's the link to do so. All right, one second. I didn't do that yet. I love that there's an ODI net and an ODA net fast, just in case you were finding the other one too slow. Yeah, and you're going to get notifications too. Oh, seriously, that's crazy.
It's also EduWeb. EduWeb is the best one.
EduWeb.
Is it? This isn't going to work? Or there it seems this will. I really don't want to go through that right now. I'm going to skip that. There is a technical description of how all of the Amazon Web Services that we use for hosting the hats and provisioning them all line up. At that link I was going to go to. Go to the link afterwards if you want to try and play around yourself to show you all of the tricks that you see to how to use the functions. In the meantime, let's do this one. So, on its most basic level, the hat, hub of all things, is a microserver, which is essentially a database wrapped with microservices. Each of those microservices has a different function, and the actual technology itself was developed out of between 2 and 4, depending on whether you care about the core technology or some of the spin-off projects that came out of it, years of RC UK funded research. It was done by 12 universities across the UK, and the original goal was to try and identify some of the technological solutions that could answer what was going on in the digital economy that seemed like that. And the results of that research was, first, this open source technology that will store your data in a database of its own. What it breaks the microservices down to are person-controllable ways of moving data around inside a database that only has one person's worth of information inside it. The microservices come in three flavors: writing data, giving data, and getting data. I'll get into each of them with a description in a second. But essentially, our goal here is to establish a piece of technology that allows the people who have one to become hat owners and also thus the owners of the data inside the hat. There is an app that you can use to see the data that is inside one of these hats. It is a technology that we have built for web, Google, and Android. Android and iOS. The technology that we have built to do that is only a window into the microservice though. And the idea is that the technology is the database. It's delivered in near real time. I think now it probably can safely be called real time, through a container. And has a lot of inner workings, which we worked quite hard on as the core technology of the hat. The app itself is a way of showing that, but we want there to be a lot of other apps that show you what's inside your hat. Better, same as, more, in a different way than we do. Because we want the core innovation to be the microservice, the database wrapped in the microservice itself. So the first of these three microservices, these three categories of microservices, are called data plugs. What they essentially end up looking like is an app or a piece of software that essentially goes out into the internet, will find a source of data and provide a machine-to-machine interface for putting that data for that user into one of these databases. We have set up a number of these. Data plugs exist at the moment for some social data, calendar data, payments data, photos data, that kind of thing. And we make the data plugs that we create open source, and they are easy enough to create for more and more data types. We wait for a use case though, so as people have a use case requiring one, we build it.
On the right-hand side of the chart, you're saying there's a legal switch of ownership.
Yeah.
How are you actually making that happen?
So we do all of our data plug acquisition according to subject access requests. As long as a subject access request is a legally protected right of the user to access information from a corporation, we can claim that we have acquired that data for the user, and then as soon as it's inside the hat, that is a database that the user owns. The data that is inside it is theirs. If that stops being the case, because we change the terms of GDPR, or if subject access requests get identified as not being suitable for this kind of a thing, we have never had a court case that says you can't fish data out for a database of your own according to a subject access request. If that were to ever happen, and that were to no longer be viable, then we would have to have another conversation about the legality of the data.
So it's a bit continuing to follow this thing. Some of the data types on the right, so social media, calendar, payments, actually all of them include data that's about multiple people. Yeah, really interesting. So legally, I would have rights over it. Yeah, if I was one of those people, and etc.
It's a very good catch, because essentially I shouldn't say that you can own the data. I should say that you can have data ownership rights to it, or intellectual property rights to ownership. Not being a lawyer, and also not really getting into the proper legal arguments in this talk, I will only say this. I'm not sure we've actually figured out yet, as a society, legally, how we're going to do all of this. I don't know if we know how data ownership is going to boil out in the long run, and I certainly don't think that Westminster has figured out for themselves what they want it to be. And so we're just following them for now. What we want to be able to do is provide the economic incentives. Any suggestions? Maybe I went to sleep. Provide the economic incentives for more and more data exchange. And I think I just. And then let the law follow it, because that's what we expect to happen in the economy.
Perhaps it's a very lawyerly question, but why the right of access and not the right to data portability? It seems to be one specifically suited for this kind of transfers.
A very good question. We want to wrap the legal question into you have your own database. We're the owner of that database, and as a result, you can do stuff with the data that's inside it. Maybe that means that you can go beyond portability and into ownership rights. Maybe there's something that comes from being able to legally claim ownership rights. Not being on the legal side of the game really right.
Because I think it intersects with the technical side. When you receive the data, then the subject asks a request. It's going to be, yes, in an electronic format, but not in a commonly used format necessarily, which that is a requirement if you exercise your right to data portability.
Okay.
In a structured and commonly used format.
You pivoted into something very valuable to talk about. I don't understand the legal question well enough to comment on it too well, but I will say that the way we take data in is in an unencumbered fashion, and we follow the formatting of the source of the data, which means that if that is the case, if the data comes in this completely unusable way, we rate the application that is being used to acquire the data really badly because it has this unintelligible format. But we don't actually do anything to change the data as it is at the moment. Now that changes as we want to use the data in more interesting ways or as the users decide that they want to do that. But we haven't gotten to a place yet.
So, and does the architecture been built? Can I do a subject access request on it?
Yes, absolutely.
For my data set.
That's right. Indeed. And you should. Yeah, one of the ratings sort of categories that we have for any app building on top of personal data, person-owned personal data accounts is if you do a subject access request to the organization building that application, does all of the data that comes back from the subject access request come from the user's hat? Or does it come a certain amount of it from the user's hat and then also expose data that you might store about the user on a corporate server? And if it does that,
or in other hats.
That's right, or anywhere else. And if it does that, then essentially, again, the rating system that we use to govern all apps and services reflects that.
And just as part of so I work here at the API. So part of where I'm coming from on this is I think of rights-based models and strong ownership-based models. Yeah. So I'm looking at it through slightly different lens. So when I'm looking through that with rights, it jars.
I think we would be of the argument that if it was possible to be able to protect the rights to the asset inside the database, we would want to do that. But yeah, not work.
So is it the case that your hats are effectively, because what I struggle with is at the end of the day, I mean, my data is not very interesting. Your data on their own isolated is not very interesting. I mean, power data comes from aggregated data. So here, are we not going backwards rather than forward in trying to move all this data into little hats?
I love the conversation about the interestingness of data when it is in aggregate. I think that your data is very interesting in aggregate if you are coming at it from the perspective of someone designing an algorithm to learn something new about a lot of data. It is very interesting to me what data I have that makes being able to plot a path to the nearest tube station very easily and quickly. And all of the varying algorithms that might be possible to be deployed upon just my data. But training is required for a lot of that, and training has to be aggregated data. There's nothing that stops you aggregating a whole bunch of hat users' data if you have the permission of the hat user. Right? There's absolutely nothing that says that you can't build a database of all of this permissioned data from the user-owned personal data. I do hear what you're saying about if you were trying to most efficiently build algorithms, wouldn't the most efficient way to build algorithms to have better big databases rather than a lot of really small databases? And to that, I have a point on that, which will come up later, and it's essentially the edge argument. But I totally agree. If that is your goal, better algorithms, and we just have to figure out better ethical treatment of data, then I think this is probably not the most efficient way. It is probably the clearest way to show the user where their data is going, but I don't know if that necessarily matters in that case.
So the owners, let's call them owners of their little hats. So, I mean, it's very plausible that this is only the very beginning of the story. The real story happens when some organization gets in touch with, say, 2,000 owners of hats and say, hey guys, can I access your data?
Come together and contribute to this database.
In this model, what are these people going to do? Like, they have their little hats, and they may know nothing about their rights. They haven't even thought about what kind of things they want to do with their data.
Yeah, so we get back into the economic question a little bit more, and I'll be honest, technical talks about the hat are tough, because the technical stuff is not that complicated. Like, it's perfectly feasible to create small databases inside a container and then issue them through cloud services. Like, that's pretty feasible. What we spent most of the last 2 years, and what we care about doing the most right now, is working out to whom and in what ways a person-owned data account actually makes sense economically, where the incentives lie, what kinds of liens you need to put in where, what the legal implications are. I will just quickly say this. Sort of the path here is much like the path for payday loans. If you're trying to regulate payday loans, you don't go to the people who are asking for the loans and say, you guys should ask for better loans because the terms for these loans are horrendous. You go to the payday lenders and you say, there's a way better way of issuing lending. Can we maybe do that and not, force these guys to a lifetime of poverty? And we are employing a very similar model, but with a more economic form of data exchange. When you go to an app builder or a service or a company, you have an argument to them, especially for the ones that are doing really interesting things with data, where if you get to say, the data that you'll get is better. It's more unique, it's more interesting, it's deeper, it comes from multiple different sources, it's more ethically sourced, it's more transparent to the user, it comes with all the permissions built in, and the infrastructure is all sorted out, and the security is really, really high end. It makes a lot of sense for them to sort of say, and what's the catch? Oh, I have to give my users one of these personal data accounts, and it costs the same as Amazon Web Services? Okay, sure, no problem. And then similarly to the user, it makes a lot more sense to start talking to them about their personal data from the context of, okay, look, we've ticked off a lot of the boxes of the permissioning and the security and where it's going to live and how to get it to the person that you're talking to. All that's kind of fine, but the reward for you getting one of these things is you get a better service, or you get a cheaper financial model, or you get whatever you get. And that is what we have learned for the economic sort of incentives of all of this.
Sticking with economics, at the individual level, I think individual data is interesting to the fraudster. Having had my identity stolen several years ago, I'm very aware that people do want all of this stuff.
Yep.
And what worries me actually is that if I have all my social stuff, very little, if I have my calendar, payments, health data in one place, this makes it worse for me later on because I don't want
the worst kind of honeypot for you.
Yeah.
So the argument here, security-wise, is twofold. One, if you really care about securing your personal data, and you know where all of it lives, it makes it way easier for you to go above and beyond market to find ways of additionally securing it than if it lives in 50 million places and you really don't know who's got it, and it could be all over the place. Because you can take action in a way you couldn't take action. In addition, some of the honeypot problem is removed. It's very enticing for a hacker to try and go after a lot of credit cards if they have one place where they can get all of the credit cards if they get it. If they're trying to go after credit cards and they have to get into every single bank every time they want each one, it's really hard for them. So some of the incentives shift. But ultimately, what we're really talking about here is for you personally, is it possible to get to a reasonable level of security over just your data that makes it securable? And I would argue that the cloud services doing it the way that we're doing it here, it makes it a little bit easier to try and tackle that challenge than if we have to keep replicating the data across dozens and dozens of services. Right now, the best tool you've got to protecting your personal data across a lot of different services is to stop using it. That's a really bad way. So we're trying to go one step above that.
Sorry, Jonathan, can I just say, we're going to have time at the end for people to ask questions to the panel. I appreciate Jonathan probably has a few more slides he wants to get through, and I want to be fair to the speakers that are coming next. So,
my fault, I apologize.
no, that's okay. So in the future talks, it's great to ask these questions, but after a certain point, I might just say, can you hold on to your questions for the end where we have the panel up and we can ask all of them at the same time?
I'm also going to go quite a lot faster now, so stay with me if you can. So there are two other types of microservices that we care about talking about. One is a data debit. Any app building on top of a user-owned user-owned personal data account essentially pulls data out through data debits. They do so essentially with a snapshot being taken where the check marks are of a data transaction, same as an end-user license agreement or whatever would today. This allows us to move from an acquiring model of data, i.e. I want to offer you a service, and so I have to get a whole bunch of data and then offer you the service, into an inquiring model for data, where I want to offer you a service. Can I ask you a couple of questions? Okay, great, now here's your service. What we want to do is essentially make it so that all kinds of third-party apps can have an inquiry into one data type, or one data set, rather than all kinds of third-party apps trying to acquire a whole bunch of data. Here we get into the magic that we think leads this into what the next generation work of these technologies is going to get into. The third kind of microservice is called a tool. And a tool is an algorithm or a service that runs privately inside the hat with the permission of the user, completely independently of external activity. So you can train an algorithm, put it inside a user's hat, have that algorithm deliver new insights about that person from the data, put that data into the hat like normal, and then you can extract the data inside. That doesn't say anything new. That's what it does. The idea here is that you can use the engine for these algorithms running privately to create original data. So if you're a corporation or an app or a service that wants to have information that was previously unhavable about your users because it's running over too much information, or because it means you have to mix and match too many different data types or whatever, you can now put one of those algorithms inside the hat, have that algorithm create the information that you need, and then inquire for the newly created information the same way you inquire for any other information. That also doesn't say anything new. Neither does that really. Essentially that we think everyone's going to build machine learning predictive analytics and resources. Which I think is then more apps, more tools, more plugs, more apps, more tools, more plugs, more apps, more tools. The organization that created HATS is HADAX. It's a for-profit company spun out of this research. It's a standard startup. We're going to raise our seed round fairly soon. In addition to them, there is an accelerator and a nonprofit that regulates all of the apps and also all of the people who have HATS. The idea here is that because this is a user-ownable, a citizen-ownable asset, they deserve a voice, they deserve some representation over how the community of this technology works. That is all through the nonprofit called the Hat Community Foundation. There's also a research body called Hat Lab. That's where all of the research methods are. That's it. I have already talked about that. I've already talked about that. We're raising money. You're obligated to say you're raising money if you're raising money, just in case anyone happens to have a lot of it. And that's it. Essentially, the way I like to think of this is we have always, literally since 30, 50 years ago, as we were building technology, built ever-increasing platforms on top of a gadget, a thing that, a piece of technology that can do something new and valuable. And I think the next version of those gadgets is the cloud-based one. That we don't actually have to carry around with a piece of, like a piece of hardware. And we have used, ever increasingly sophisticated digital identities to access the technology that we get to through those gadgets. And I also think that the next version of those is the personal data account, the richer version of what, an email address provided as a sort of a digital passport, or the mobile phone provided as a digital passport. So I think we're converging around this new platform for personal data, which is why I call the talk the really arrogant and ridiculous new data platform, or something like that. It's not necessarily the hat